We've been hearing about this for a very long time, right? We've been thinking about this. We've been both Hans and Jeff. You guys have been, researching this from a very, very early time, and all of this. So it's very interesting to see all these stories kind of come together. The thing that amazes me is that there's new characters sort of appearing that most people that were doing this research, frankly, were not aware of at all. Like, for example, Jaffe is someone that myself talking to a number of people who are deeply involved in these investigations, including Cash Patel, which we talked about this on Cash's Corner, just simply wasn't aware of him being involved. At the same time, this character, he's got unbelievable levels of access to what's supposed to be in an incredibly secure setting, right? Like ostensibly in the White House. So who is this guy? How did he get this clearance? I mean, what can you flesh out here?
Right, that's the big unknown. How did this guy get his clearance? So this guy is actually from South Africa. And in the 80s, he lived in Beverly Hills, but he ran a mail order scam. So the mail order scam consisted of, well, he was data mining, just as now he's data mining as well. He was just kind of data mining in the old world where things were done by post. So he was mining people's addresses and so on. And then he started writing to these people in all kinds of states, these little postcards telling them that they had won like this big prize. And the big prize was this super great grandfather clock. And all they had to do was send in $70 for shipping and handling, and then they could have this great clock. Well, it turns out the clock was just like kind of a very trashy clock, which is said to have cost less than $10. So, he kind of pockets the difference there. And he ran that scam across many states. And he had to settle with, for instance, the Attorney General in Iowa, who said that he had cheated or scammed over 10,000 people. And that's just in Iowa alone. So that's what this guy was doing. And then all of a sudden, he shifts into DNS. So in 96, he founds this DNS company. This company is later on taken over by another company in 2006 called Newstar. And that was kind of his rise to fame when he was, well, maybe not fame, but sort of access, shall we say, where he was with Newstar and he became senior vice president and he was head of security, which is kind of a bit sketchy in itself. So it's not clear how he was able to rise through the ranks like that, given his background. But what is interesting is that you have this parallel where he was exploiting mailing lists in the past, and now he's exploiting, DNS data in the present, or at least, back in 2016. Little side note is in 2013, Jim Comey awarded Rodney Joffe the FBI Director's Award for, I think, cybersecurity or something like that. So, yeah, it really does make you think, how does some guy like that rise through the ranks? How did he get a security clearance? We don't know.
And, there are material questions on this. You have somebody with a questionable background who gains this incredibly important access. You would think that he wouldn't have been able to pass the background check, but whatever, he is in his position. And he's now providing the information to Sussman, according to Durham's filings. Well, we think that there's real national security concerns here. Who else is he possibly providing this information to? Was it limited to only Sussman? We know there was many reporters who were hungry for information. So, character-wise, there's a lot of questions here as well. How did he get here? And was his contact, was his efforts, was it geared only towards Sussman? Were there more parties that received information? And we find it fascinating that there doesn't seem to be a curiosity about that from the intelligence agencies.
Well, and I mean, the obvious question is this sort of thing, legal somehow?
Well, there's the legality of accessing information for kind of the wrong reasons is a bit tricky. So if you have access to a database through your job, and you're supposed to use the data for this and this, but then, because you're curious or for whatever reason, you go and access the data for other reasons. It's a bit of a gray zone. So last year, the Supreme Court came back and said, well, if you had legal access to the data, then it's not illegal. But I mean, there's different shades to this. By the way, there's a parallel here to Chelsea Manning, who supposedly had access to a lot of the data that she shared. So again, is that legal, illegal? It's not an easy question to answer. But in terms of whether what these people did was illegal, I think what Durham is really looking at is the conspiracy angle. If you conspire with someone else to lie to the FBI, present false information, as Jeff said earlier, it wasn't like they just got data on a USB stick and handed it over to the FBI. No, they spent weeks and months sort of collating the information, curating the information. There was an effort involved because, of course, they wanted to shape a narrative. And in fact, they were discussing the fact that they wanted to shape an anti-Trump narrative in their emails, which Durham got hold of and which Durham cites in his filing. So they were shaping a narrative in order to kind of trick the FBI into thinking this is really serious stuff. And that's a conspiracy to lie to the FBI, and that's going to be a real problem for them.
Oh, fascinating. Well, and also, so, you know, through these filings about Sussman is kind of, you know, portraying himself as being this sort of interested party wanting to help, you know, share important information. Maybe can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, Sussman is portraying himself in his counter filings as a high-minded whistleblower, somebody of good intent, who simply came upon this information. It was presented to him. And as a private citizen, he was alarmed at what he saw and thought that it should be taken to the FBI. And that sounds well and good, but it ignores a couple points. One of those is that there was, as we've already discussed, this parallel track of information, that there was the alpha information and there was the DNS information. And the other thing that, well, one of the other things that it ignores is that Sussman spent 3 months collating this information. So he received this kind of raw data, if you will. He got it from Jaffe sometime at May 4th is when he started actually collating. He probably got the data in April. And he spent the next 3 months repackaging that data. He was not going to the FBI with a USB stick and saying, hey, I just got this information. You folks need to take a look at it. Rather, he spent all this time crafting this information. And of course, we have the manner in which he approached the FBI as well. Sussman goes ahead and meets with James Baker, who happens to be a friend of his. And, in testimony, Baker says, I've never been approached like this before. Now, Sussman knows full well that if he's going in as one of the senior, he at the time was in charge of cybersecurity. I may be getting his title wrong, but the gist is correct. In charge of cybersecurity for Perkins Coie. And he approaches Baker with this information, which he's now spent months collating, and is able to gain access to Baker both through his position and through his friendship with Baker, and presents this information to Baker directly. And this is where Durham's public charge comes into play, is that Sussman doesn't tell him that he's actually acting on behalf of the Clinton campaign, that he's coming to him as a private citizen. But again, even on that basis, Baker himself has said, no, this is the only time something like this has happened. And what Sussman was doing at this exact same time to make sure that the FBI acted is that he went to the New York Times and a couple other media outlets, including Slate, and gave them the story, and then turned around and told the FBI what he's doing. And that creates a situation where suddenly the FBI is sort of forced to act. Not only do this have this information, but they now have to go to these media outlets and say, hey, just sit on the stories for a little bit. Let us take a look.